By the winter of 1944, the Luftwaffe was no longer fighting for air superiority. They were fighting for survival. The Allied bomber streams were so vast and so well protected by P-51 Mustangs that the German air defense was being systematically slaughtered at mid-altitudes. Their illegal response was to retreat into a place where no one else could go, the stratosphere. This segment introduces the Junkers Ju-388 Stortebeker, a machine designed to operate in the death zone above 40,000 feet, an altitude where the air is so thin that human lungs cannot extract oxygen and blood begins to boil without mechanical intervention. We dive deep into the illegal engineering of the cockpit. Unlike the open-air cockpits of the early war, the Ju-388 featured a radical, fully glazed hemispherical nose that was completely sealed. It wasn't just a window, it was a pressure vessel. We explore the high-stakes chemistry used to keep the pilots alive, the forbidden seals. Engineers had to develop synthetic rubber and specialized lacquers that wouldn't turn brittle in the -50°C temperatures of the upper atmosphere. This act details the physical sensation of flying in a pressurized tomb, the constant, high-pitched hiss of the air pumps, and the terrifying knowledge that the only thing between the pilot and instant vacuum-induced death was a few millimeters of specialized glass and a series of hand-applied chemical gaskets. The technical scandal of the Ju-388 was its remote-controlled defense. Because the cockpit had to be perfectly sealed to maintain pressure, you couldn't have a gunner sitting in the back with an open window. The solution was an illegal technological leap for the 1940s, the FA-15 remote-controlled tail turret. The pilot or navigator used a periscope system from inside the pressurized bubble to aim and fire two machine guns located at the very back of the plane. We examined the complexity of this system, how a series of electric motors and servos allowed the crew to fight without ever breaking the vacuum seal of the cabin. It was the first stealth defensive system of its kind, making the Ju-388 a ghost that could bite back without showing its teeth. The final minutes of this act cover the slave labor quality crisis. As Allied bombs leveled the Junkers factories, production moved underground. The forbidden truth of the Ju-388 is that these high-precision pressure seals were being manufactured by workers in horrific conditions who had no specialized training. We detail the harrowing result: microfractures. When these planes were pushed to their 45,000-foot ceiling during test flights, the poor quality of the materials caused the cabins to leak. We tell the story of pilots who would suddenly feel their skin tingle, the first sign of the bends as the pressure dropped. This act concludes with the terrifying reality that the Ju-388 was a masterpiece of science built with the tools of a collapsing empire, turning every mission into a countdown toward a catastrophic structural failure in the vacuum of space.
At 40,000 feet, the atmosphere is a ghost of itself. There simply isn't enough oxygen to sustain a standard combustion engine. To solve the problem of suffocating engines, the Ju-388 utilized an illegal chemical cocktail known as GM1. This act dives into the volatile world of nitrous oxide injection. By injecting liquid laughing gas directly into the superchargers, the engine received an instantaneous surge of oxygen and cooling, allowing it to perform at high altitudes as if it were still at sea level. We explore the forbidden physics of this system, The nitrous wasn't just a boost, it was a way to cheat the thinning atmosphere, turning the Ju-388 into a predator that could outrun anything the Allies could put in the air. This segment covers the illegal chemical hazard of the GM-1 system. The nitrous oxide had to be stored in massive, heavily insulated high-pressure tanks behind the cockpit. If these tanks were hit by even a single stray bullet or shard of flak, they didn't just leak, they turned the aircraft into a flying blowtorch. We detail the harrowing accounts of the blue flame, a phenomenon where the chemical exhaust of the Ju-388 would glow with a haunting, ethereal blue light in the dark, thin air of the stratosphere. Pilots reported that while the speed was exhilarating, the vibration of the engines under chemical stress felt like the entire airframe was trying to shake itself into 1,000 pieces. The act then shifts to the MW50 loophole. In addition to nitrous, the Ju-388 often utilized a secondary illegal boost, a 50-50 mix of methanol and water. This wasn't for power, but for survival. The methanol-water mix was sprayed into the intake to prevent the engine from melting under the extreme heat generated by the high-altitude superchargers. We explore the forbidden equilibrium, the delicate, terrifying balance the pilot had to maintain. He had to manage the throttle, the nitrous flow, and the methanol injection simultaneously. 1 second of neglect or a slight imbalance in the chemical feed would cause the cylinder heads to warp or the pistons to fuse instantly, turning the high-tech interceptor into a multi-ton glider in a matter of heartbeats. The final portion of this act describes the stratospheric dogfights. We look at the forbidden tactics used by the Ju-388 pilots against Allied reconnaissance planes. Because they were moving so fast in air so thin, traditional maneuvering was impossible. The wings would simply lose lift and stall. Instead, it was a game of acoustic sniping. The Ju-388 would zoom up from below, fire its boosted engines to close the gap, and use its superior speed to strike before diving back into the safety of the vacuum. This act concludes with the realization that while the nitrous demon gave the Luftwaffe a temporary edge, it turned the aircraft into a mechanical heart patient, powerful but always one heartbeat away from a total, catastrophic stroke in the most hostile environment on Earth.
The final act of the Junkers J388 story isn't one of combat glory, but of illegal structural disintegration. As 1945 began, the Third Reich's industrial backbone was shattered. This segment explores the collapse of quality, where the high-precision requirements of stratospheric flight met the reality of a starving, bombed-out supply chain. We detail the scandal of the seals, the specialized synthetic rubbers required to keep the cockpit pressurized were no longer available. In their place, desperate engineers used inferior substitutes that became brittle and cracked the moment they hit the sub-zero temperatures of the upper atmosphere. This act covers the horrific phenomenon of explosive decompression. We tell the forbidden stories of test pilots who reached the 40,000-foot ceiling only for a single microscopic flaw in the window sealant to fail. At that altitude, the pressure difference is so violent that it doesn't just leak, it explodes. The air is sucked out of the cabin in less than half a second, shattering the pilot's eardrums and causing gas bubbles to form in the blood instantly. We describe the ghost crashes, J388s that would be seen flying perfectly level on radar, only to slowly pitch forward and dive into the earth, because the crew had been vacuum-killed in their seats, leaving a perfectly functional plane to fly itself into the ground. The illegal abandonment phase follows. As Allied tanks rolled toward the Junkers assembly plants, the order was given to destroy the J-388s rather than let them fall into enemy hands. But the speed of the Allied advance was too great. This segment details Operation Lusty, the secret U.S. Army Air Force mission to capture advanced Nazi tech. We explore the shock of the Americans when they first sat inside a captured J-388. They found technology they didn't think existed: synchronized remote-control turrets, advanced radar arrays, and engine systems that wouldn't be perfected in the West for another decade. The J-388 wasn't just a plane, it was a blueprint from the future, stolen from the wreckage of a nightmare. We conclude with the legacy of the vacuum. The J-388 disappeared from the history books, but its DNA lived on in the illegal spy planes of the Cold War. The pressurized cabins, the nitrous-boosted high-altitude performance, and the streamlined aerodynamics were directly studied to create the U-2 and the early jet bombers. We end on the haunting image of the only surviving J-388 fuselage in the world, sitting in a dark corner of a Smithsonian warehouse. A stratospheric ghost that tried to win a war by leaving the planet, only to be dragged down by the very gravity of the regime that birthed it.